A couple of days ago, the flailing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, he's claimed that his long terror-plagued island now has a new spectre, and it has arisen to stalk the streets of the country and is made up of violent loners, misfits, and young men in their bedrooms. He claims that incels, or the involuntary celibates, are typically men who express hostility and extreme resentment toward those who are sexually active, particularly women, and that they are a danger to the country. While Sir Keir, as all people should, condemns any expression of violence, what he does not explain is that while there are many, many reasons for the newly formed incel culture, one of the most obvious is the simple fact that across the Western world, there are now nations with many, many, many more young men than women, and that this is the result and has been created out of the policies enacted by governments from Ottawa to Berlin. And policy has consequences, just as migration has always been part of the human experience. Many historians claim that the mismanagement of a migrant crisis 1700 years ago helped lead to the downfall of the Roman Empire. And it is the mass migration of people that are currently on the move and with the West as their final destination that will become the defining issue of our time. While there are many things to consider, one aspect of the current migration stands out from other mass movements of people in recent times, and that is it's primarily made up of young men. And these young men, coming from places like Africa and the Middle East, for example, are arriving in such lopsided numbers as to skew the gender balance of some countries in Europe and now even in Canada, to a point where, according to sociologists, massive destabilization could be the end result. Now, while on the topic of men and masculinity, it does go without saying that most of the mainstream media, government, and other organs of the state seem to have an extreme dislike for anything, manly. Many of you might remember, as I do, the controversies that were lit by Joe Rogan, who's a healthy guy, during the pandemic, as he made numerous disputed claims about the virus, vaccines, and lockdowns, many of which obviously turned out to be true. It was also during this time that he mentioned something that helps us mere mortals stay healthy, and that is NMN. Now, rather than me trying to explain it, I'm going to let Dr. Andrew Huberman, a tenured neuroscientist from Stanford, who was recently on the Joe Rogan Experience, explain what NMN is and how Big Pharma is trying to take it away by patenting it as a prescription drug due to its incredible effectiveness.
We were talking, I think last time we spoke about supplementation as it relates to, metabolic pathways. And one thing I've been tracking pretty closely is this whole, the NMN thing has now taken a different direction.
I was going to bring it up before we wrap this up. So let's explain NMN for people. It's a precursor for NAD+.
Right. NAD is critical to energy production in all cells, vital. And levels of NAD tend to go down as we age. It's an absolute requirement for cellular health in life. You need it. Some years ago, as David Sinclair came on this podcast and discussed that his laboratory is a tenured professor of genetics, Harvard Medical School, and other laboratories are starting to explore stimulating the NAD pathway as a tool for extending lifespan. You can't just take NAD, or you can, but it doesn't get into cells very easily. There are basically two ways that you can tickle this pathway, increase NAD. One is to take NMN. NMN could soon be a prescription drug that you can only get with a prescription. And then I think Metro International Biotech will likely hold the patent. I will say with NMN, a couple of things happened. First of all, my recovery from workouts much better. I had to take it early day because it was giving me a lot of energy. I did notice my hair and nails growing at a ridiculous rate. And then I came off it just as a control experiment, slowed down again. So it was really interesting. I think there's something there in cellular growth pathways.
Interesting.
So with NMN, you get improved energy, weight management, endurance, and strength. There's lots of videos on YouTube that have people that have taken it for 1, 2, 3 years. Look them up for yourself. Seems like everybody who takes it feels better. I myself have been taking it for a year now, almost a year now, and I can feel the difference. I feel better. So get yours while you can before they attempt to patent it. And for the next 48 hours, use my link to buy 2 and get 1 free. The link is below in the description and in the pinned comment. I think you'll be mightily surprised and pleasantly surprised by the results. In the world's most populous nations, China and India, men outnumber women by millions. Chinese health authorities describe the gender imbalance among newborns as the most serious and prolonged in the world. According to Nicholas Eberstadt in his book, The Demographic Future, he projects that by 2030, 1 in 4 Chinese men will never get married. Numerous commentators are predicting that this situation will lead to increased levels of antisocial behavior and violence, and will ultimately present a threat to the stability and security of these countries. And there is empirical evidence for these prognosticators of doom. Gender is a well-established individual-level correlate of crime, and especially violent crime. It is a consistent finding across all cultures that an overwhelming percentage of violent crime is perpetrated by young, unmarried, low-status males. In China, young male internal migrant workers are thought to be responsible for a disproportionate amount of urban crime, especially violent crime. It's reported that migrants account for 50% of all criminal cases in the major receiving cities for internal migrants, with some cities reporting up to 80%. In India, a study carried out between 1980 and 1982 showed a strong correlation between homicide rates in individual states across the country and sex ratio of those states, after controlling for potential things like urbanization and poverty. As postulated by Valerie Hudson and Andrea Denboer in their study A Surplus of Men, A Deficit of Peace, well, they predict that unattached men have the potential to trigger large-scale domestic and international violence. The authors also argue that sex imbalance could impact regional and even global security, especially because the surrounding countries of Pakistan, Taiwan, Nepal, and Bangladesh also have high sex imbalance ratios. Moreover, any society, the authors suggest, any society becomes inherently unstable when sex ratios reach something like 120 males to 100 females, because when large numbers of men are doomed to bachelorhood, they get desperate. A shortage of women via polygamy is also often cited as being one of the strongest factors that destabilizes the society of much of Africa along with the Islamic world. As explained in The Economist, wherever polygamy is widely practiced, turmoil tends to follow. The 20 most fragile states in the world are all somewhat or very polygamous. Polygamous nations are also more likely to invade their neighbors. A study out of the London School of Economics found a strong link between plural marriage and civil war. In fact, groups like Boko Haram and ISIS use the theology of Islam as well as the example of the Prophet Muhammad himself in regularly slaughtering the men of groups they believe to be heretical or disbelievers, and then sexually enslave their women. Valerie Hudson, in another study, found that a high bride price, typical in polygamous societies, is a critical factor predisposing young men to become involved in organized group violence for political purposes, and that jihadist groups know this and exploit this. And when looking to Western Europe, that has no cultural affinity toward polygamy or sex-selective abortions, the same problem with regards to gender imbalance is being imported via policy, and all of its attending consequences are beginning to manifest themselves in countries like Sweden, Germany, and as far afield as Canada. While the tsunami of migrants heading toward Western Europe has abated somewhat in the past year or so, millions upon millions upon millions of people from the developing world still want to make the welfare states of Western Europe their new home. The vast majority of those that have already arrived are young men. Images of those being ferried by human traffickers to awaiting NGO boats in the Mediterranean, those attempting to break down the gates in Spanish exclaves in North Africa, as well as the small boat crisis in the United Kingdom, shows that this is a young, masculine affair. And just as indicated in these studies, there is also evidence that with an abundance of single young men that Europe is now grappling with, aggression is likely to increase substantially, as we're now witnessing today with each grisly headline after lurid and horrific headline. As such, images of women at train stations drowning in euphoria, waving refugees welcome placards has faded, and the mood of the continent has changed considerably, and this can best be demonstrated by the hardening on the issue, as well as the rightward shift politically across the continent, Germany being the best example. In an article published in the Irish Examiner, the author Daniel Gross basically goes over the same information to explain the current rise in populism and rejection of the EU's open border policy. He points out that the arrival of massive numbers of male migrants is triggering a response that is rooted in evolutionary psychology. The implication is, Gross points out, is that as sex imbalances grow across Europe, rejection of open borders may be rooted partly in a primordial defense response by local men who want to protect their territory, including their women, from other men arriving. While the United States has found its sanity and the failed Prime Minister of Canada has hinted toward the same, the open borders agenda, currently in full swing across Europe, shows no sign of abating. And if the current gender imbalance is not remedied, the involuntary celibates, or incels, could possibly create long-term problems that could plunge the continent into widespread and unending violence of all manner. It will also inevitably lead to a large expansion of the sex industry, including its more unacceptable practices such as coercion and trafficking, as it has in India and China over the past few decades, and already with Ukrainian diaspora in Europe over the past 3. But what is clear is that none of this is a surprise. All of this was predictable and forecast by many, including this channel, and nonetheless has been imported, facilitated, accelerated, and encouraged by the authorities. So thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please check to see that you are still subscribed. Also, if you'd like to help the channel, it'd be very much appreciated. Also, remember to check out the link to my sponsor that is in the description, Black Forest, and their very beneficial supplements. I've been taking them for almost a year now and stand by the quality of the product. Again, information to find Black Forest supplements is in the description. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. With that said, thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.